Material blessings. We should never conclude that wealth in itself is an indication of God's approval of our attitudes and behavior. Here's Gene Getz to explain.
May I remind you that some of the richest people in the world are the most criminal minds that have ever existed on the face of the earth. Wealth per se is not a sign of God's blessing. And I think when it comes to Abraham, you will see that even with Abraham, God blessed him in spite of his weaknesses, in spite of his failures, and simply to conclude that he became wealthy because he did what was right would be a false conclusion. So, if you look at Genesis chapter 12, verse 16, we read, "He," that is, the Pharaoh, "treated Abram well because of her. And Abram acquired flocks and herds and male and female donkeys and male and female slaves and camels." In other words, even while she was in his harem, Pharaoh was honoring Abram because of what he told him as being his sister. But notice that once it was discovered, Abraham went up from Egypt to the Negev, he and his wife, all he had, and Lot with him. And Abram was very rich. By the way, Lot got very wealthy too. He cashed in on Uncle Abraham and on Uncle Abraham's failures, and God blessed Abraham and God blessed him. Abram was very rich in livestock and silver and gold. He went by stages from the Negev to Bethel, to the place between Bethel and Ai, where his tent had formerly been, and to the site where he had built the altar. And Abraham worshiped the Lord there. And I believe that he had a renewed experience with God following his experiences in Egypt. You see, one of the reasons that God blessed Abraham and Lot is something stated by Jesus, and that is, "For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and he sends rain on the righteous and on the unrighteous." So the principle basically is that we should never conclude that wealth in itself is an indication of God's approval, even as believers, of our attitudes and of our behavior. The scriptures are very clear. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17. "Therefore I say this, testifying the Lord, you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their thoughts." We're to be new creations. And in verse 25 of chapter 4, he gets very specific. "Since you put away lying," including half-truths, I think is the implication, "speak the truth." Sometimes, by the way, the truth hurts. It brings pain. I think we should be wise. Speak the truth. Each one to his neighbor, because we are members of one another. And that is a very, very important principle that I think we have to take into consideration. There's a principle that comes from Psalms. I call it Principle 70 because there are about 150 plus principles that come from the book of Psalms. But in order to maintain our spiritual equilibrium, we are to have an eternal perspective on material possessions rather than focusing on the temporary prosperity of the wicked. And there you will see in Psalms, the psalmist was really exercised in his soul because evil people were prospering. And he just said, "How is this true? And especially since I'm not prospering and I'm trying to do your will. And why are all these evil people prospering?" Well, the sun shines on everybody and the rain falls. It's God's common grace. We looked at that principle last week. So let's move on to the question. What are some of the areas where we as Christians can be easily tempted to be dishonest and unethical, and then rationalize this sinful behavior because we're accumulating more worldly possessions? Boy, that's easy, isn't it? In fact, as I teach right now, we're in a very significant phase in our own culture. It's called income tax time. And when it comes to income tax, there are so many ways to cheat the government and get away with it. And you've heard me use this illustration. I'm a minister. I'm called upon to do weddings. Most of the time when I do a wedding, my honorarium is in cash. Somebody gives me $200-300 in cash. Sometimes if I'm fortunate, they'll give me $500. I do funerals. It's common when someone does a funeral that you get an honorarium for the time and the effort. It's just part of protocol. Many times it's in cash. What does the law say I'm to do with that cash? It's mine, but I'm to report it to the government and pay income tax on that cash. Is there any way that I could get by without reporting it? Absolutely. Be the easiest thing in the world. Unfortunately, it's done by people. And it's done by people who are not just ministers. It's done by people who do transactions in cash and they never report the income. And there's virtually no way for it to be traced down, particularly if we're in a small category. Even those who cheat the government big time, it sometimes takes years to figure out that they're cheating the government. And they know what they can get away with. When that happens to a Christian, it's stealing. It is a violation of the will of God. We are to render to Caesar what is Caesar and to God what is God. Jesus said that. If they were responsible to pay taxes in the Roman Empire, when you had one of the most corrupt systems in the world, it doesn't matter how corrupt our government is, we still have a responsibility to pay our income tax. What I'm simply saying is there are many ways to cheat the government. The interesting thing is, since I passed my baton of leadership to my successor 5 years ago, I functioned without a salary from the Center for Church Renewal. That's my goal, if God provides, to be able to do that. But I have one thing that I receive, and that is a donor has made a car available to me, for which I'm very grateful. But I've got an issue that I've got to deal with. Every time I use that car for personal reasons rather than ministry reasons, I'm to report that mileage and to pay income tax on the personal miles. Is there any way for me to get away without reporting that? No, my wife won't let me. She has a system where on a dictaphone I record personal miles and I record business miles, and every month she takes that and documents it for income tax purposes. What I'm illustrating is there's more than one way to lie and to cheat. I could rationalize and say, Lord, I'm serving you without a salary. I deserve this. That's wrong. What I'm simply saying is that we can rationalize sinful behavior, even as believers, and we must not. Half-truths? Wow. So easy. Outright lies? It's easy. And the point is we've got to live righteous lives according to God's law of love and righteousness. So, I think there are great lessons that come out of the Bible, and they penetrate our souls, and we need to take these lessons very, very seriously.